Welcome back to the Cineposium podcast, and thank you for joining us for episode 11 of season 3. Every week we invite members or collaborators of Cineposium to curate a film for remote viewing. Then we get together on this podcast and have a conversation about the film. This week's episode is curated by Cineposium's Samantha Tecson, who's joined by Reed Williams and myself, Martin Ibarra-Ramos, as we discuss the film Tokyo Godfathers. Enjoy the conversation.
Tokyo Godfathers by Satoshi Kon is a story about three homeless people that find a baby on Christmas, and they see the baby as a gift from God. This film has them go on an adventure to find that baby's parents, and along the way, they find a little bit in themselves. And in their own way, they find the Christmas spirit. This was released in 2003 and the second film from the legendary Satoshi Kon. May he rest in peace. So my first question is to ask, so how do you guys like the film? What was your feelings? And does it get you in the Christmas spirit?
So this was my first time watching Tokyo Godfathers. I was mentioning earlier, I just watched it right before we started recording. And I really enjoyed it a lot, actually. I haven't seen too many anime films. I've been, trying to, make my way through more and more. And I hadn't heard of this before, but really, really enjoyed it. I'll say I really enjoyed the animation, and I think as far as being a Christmas film, I loved, the sort of snowy Tokyo setting. I think that the way that they used Tokyo was really nicely done, and how we kind of move around through Tokyo was really fun, and seeing all the snow and decorations at certain points, I really enjoyed kind of being in that atmosphere. So that mixed in with some of the the themes relative to Christmas, I think worked really nicely. So really enjoyed it, and I think it's something I would totally want to rewatch with because I watched it by myself. I have certain people that I might want to show this to because I really had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, so I saw this maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and at that point, I wasn't really familiar with Satoshi Kon yet as a filmmaker, and I guess I really had only been exposed to what we were talking about before we started recording. Samantha, the Studio Ghibli films like Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away. So the first time I watched it, I really just sort of picked it up at like the library kind of on a whim. And I guess I remember thinking it was fine. Like I remember liking it fine, but I didn't respond to it quite as much as I did this time around. And I wonder if it was just because of what I was like used to from anime films at the time, which is like a more kind of whimsical, fantastical type of story, where Tokyo Godfathers is really, there are definitely some like fantastical and like really extraordinary things that happen in it, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's like, fantasy in the way, say, like Spirited Away is. But anyway, all that's to say is this time around, I really responded to it way more than I did initially. And I had just completely forgotten that it was set during Christmas time. Like I remembered the general premise that, this baby is found by, people experiencing homelessness in Tokyo, but I just completely forgot about the Christmas aspect of it, which is funny just because it is so, integral to the film overall. So anyway, yeah, I really did just respond to a lot of what we'll probably end up talking about on the podcast today.
Yeah, so it was on my list to watch. As I told you guys earlier, I had a little Satoshi Kon-a-thon because he is known to be like a really good director, and is, he and Hayao Miyazaki, in terms of when people know anime directors, he tends to be one of the other ones. So I'm like, okay, well, I am a weeb, so I gotta do it. So I watched his other pieces like Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, and Paprika, but I hadn't seen Tokyo Godfathers. And I had seen like some videos on it. So I'm like, let's go do it for the Christmas episode. And it is kind of funny because you don't associate really like Japan and Christmas. And we'll kind of go to the second question, but you're watching it and you're going, oh yeah, it's Christmas. And it's kind of a different, I would say almost what's the one, like A Wonderful Life sort of Christmas film rather than a fully consistently like happy one. So one that deals with maybe the downs that could be there with Christmas. But it's a really fun film, really well animated. I understand maybe some of the things that are said aren't, that great, especially now. Like the word, of course, they pardon this being in here. They say homo, so it's like, oh, that's like not okay. And then, of course, Satoshi did say that the character of Hana is a drag queen, but I feel like it reads more, trans. So there's some things that don't, translate now maybe well, but overall a great piece, really fun. And I'm glad, the first time watching it, it's close to the holiday. So I think it has more of this kind of elated, again, feeling. So kind of to that second question, did it throw you off in any way, or how do you feel that it's, Christmas in Japan or, Christianity as well in Japan, something that we don't commonly associate because generally we teach it as they only do Shinto and that's their main religion. And I can fill in that some of their background is Christianity is a minority religion in Japan, and that Christmas is seen more of like a religious kind of holiday. So I don't know what your feelings on it is and anything else.
Yeah, I would say it did kind of surprise me at the start of the film when we're seeing the sequence with that I don't know if it was like a school performance or what if it was like a church service, but those scenes in which we're watching like sort of Christian event taking place nonetheless in Japan. I wasn't expecting to see that, although going in knowing that this was a Christmas film, so I guess that should have informed me enough to kind of be prepared for that. But it was surprising just because, as you said, it's not something that we see very often or at all. Frankly, I don't remember any other film that I've seen, Christianity taking place within Japan. So I would say I was surprised, but I don't know. As I said before, I enjoyed how the film navigated the various themes that we see in Christmas movies, and so I kind of forgot about it and kind of just enjoyed how it treated these themes. Where there was moments of comedy and moments of real sincerity, and I really liked how the narrative kind of connected between characters and developed. I thought it was really well done. So I was surprised, I'll say again, but I really enjoyed it nonetheless.
Yeah, I definitely was too, just because I had forgotten about the Christmas part of it, like I mentioned, and I wonder if that maybe even could have like informed why I didn't respond to it initially too, just because it, that whole part of it, I might not have expected, being that the film's set in Tokyo. And there were, I watched the version I watched yesterday was the dubbed version. And I was wondering what maybe some of the subtitles would say, like at certain points, because like Hana talks about like God a lot and how like, God is protecting this baby, or is like, talks about miracles a lot. And so I was curious if that was, it being dubbed, just translating it into like a more Western context, or if that's how those things were like translated, or like if that was in the original Japanese version, if that makes any sense. Like I'm just wondering if there was some sort of like way to translate some of that to make it make sense to a Western audience. just because of those Christian themes. So yeah, that is something I'm curious if, you know, Hannah is a like Christian, or if you know, when she talks about God, if it's referring to just some kind of general deity. That was something I was curious about. But it is interesting to hear just about how Christmas is kind of a more kind of a religious commercial holiday in Japan, because I think the film definitely makes a point of um, showing that in certain ways, and especially just how the nativity scene that Marty referenced is presented at the beginning, and how like all the figurines are like noticeably white and um, just that, you know, kind of pointing to Christmas being a Western holiday in its origin, and how it's sort of informed maybe some of the like commercial parts about it in Japan. Um, so yeah, it definitely surprised me as well.
Yeah, I think when I did originally, again, like see videos on this, I had blanked on that Christmas aspect. And I played a bunch of, you know, RPGs like Persona that would take place at modern times, and they have Christmas. I know like Pokemon sometimes has a Christmas episode, but I forget when you distance yourself from what we're used to on Christmas, you're like, oh, they treat it like it's kind of funny. So like in the beginning, the whole nativity scene is like very overacted. They're commenting on, you know, Hana's use of the word, you know, God, and they're like, ah, that's a little weird. And I believe in some video essays I'd seen, they talk about how, you know, she's the most maybe actively sort of Christian, again, a minority religion there, and the other two kind of aren't. And it's interesting because there's a bunch of media in Japan that totally has like a Christianic lore in it, but they kind of have it in a way that's like, it exists. Like they don't treat it, I want to say, as like real, if that makes, you know, sense. It's more like, oh yeah, these are neat stories, like neat lore. So it's interesting to see an entire movie that, you know, it's like, hey, Christmas isn't about, you know, even though they do found family in the sense they didn't need Christmas to do it. They just found a baby. So it seems like they didn't need Christmas to do it at all. But kind of the idea that's like, yeah, it's very, like you said, like very Western and very commercial is very, you know, interesting to see. And it's kind of a shock to all our happy Christmas films of let's all get together with the family. It's all happy. It's about and even we know it got commercial here as well, but it's about baby Jesus. Like, oh well, it's about uh like it is more about family, but it's like, oh, look how blatantly commercial it is. So kind of getting when I looked it up, it looks like, as far as I'm seeing for the dub versus sub, we also, so because most of us I assume had rented on Amazon, they had their first, this is the first time this movie has been dubbed at least, and it came out this year in 2020. And before, I think it was just subbed, and I can't really see anywhere that really says there's a key difference between the dub and the sub. So I think most of it is the same.
I was gonna say, sorry to interrupt. I was gonna say I'm pretty sure it was the same. I watched the subtitle version on actually on Apple TV, and pretty sure it was the same thing. Which I was also kind of curious about because, as we say, you know, it's just not a common thing that we see. So that, and then as well as, you know, later on in the film when there's some Latin characters that come about, the interesting thing is that their speech was not subtitled, and
Yeah, the same thing here.
yeah, in mine it wasn't. And so I was curious about that as well. Just kind of took note of that, but at the same time I speak Spanish, so like I knew that it was like a fairly easy writing to be able to understand if you like know a little bit of Spanish, but at the same time I was curious why it wasn't, but that's besides the point, I guess. Pretty sure, yeah, it was all the same.
Yeah, that's good to know. And yeah, it wasn't subbed. I had the captions on even though I was watching the dubbed version, and they didn't subtitle the Spanish there either, which is kind of an interesting choice. Um, and maybe just speaks to, even though there's a language barrier between the characters, there's kind of a shared understanding about the holiday between them. and it's another way to play on a theme of the film, which I think does relate to like a core kind of belief of Christianity. And you know, at the risk of like talking about the Bible on the podcast for the second week in a row, like, you know,
We'll start reading it.
I remember growing up, like, you know, they often talk about like the verses in the Bible where Jesus is saying, like, you know, the least of these, my brethren, are like great among you, like, and you know, to treat basically the person who is considered a second-class citizen in society, to treat them and view them just as you would anyone else. And I think, you know, Satoshi Kon captures that with this film, because just our protagonists are, you know, lower class, transient people who don't have homes, and, you know, who might be despised by society or looked down on, like a, you know, drag queen or trans woman or an alcoholic, or, you know, a daughter who stabbed her dad, I guess, which, you know, is one of the first sort of unexpected reveals in the film. But yeah, I do think, you know, whether, I guess, or not Hana is technically Christian or just believes in some general deity, the film definitely still speaks to the core beliefs of Christianity and kind of what I guess we're supposed to have in mind when we're getting into the spirit of Christmas.
Yeah, I think that it kind of gets down to the whole, you know, the basis of all these religions, humanity. So kind of like it's the cross of, oh, it's a bunch of people who, again, traditionally they see Christmas as a commercial holiday. Christianity's the minority religion, and they're seeing, you know, they're connecting their views of humanity as well. And then for the people who are speaking, you know, Spanish, that of course they don't understand because also we assume in dubs that they're speaking their base language, but we're hearing it as our own. So again, it's interesting that they didn't dub the other people, so we're just as, you know, confused as if we were like, whoa, we don't know, you know, who you are. But the connection was humanity. So the fact that, well, you know, the assassin, the Latino assassin, which I don't know if that's also really the greatest, you know, representation. Of course, they had, but it is made up for the fact that they cared for Miyuki. So the fact that, you know, he turns and he wasn't actually trying to, you know, threaten them. He just grabbed the nearest person, and then he takes them to his home and he's like, oh, here, my wife can you breastfeed the baby. So like the humanity of, like, his intention wasn't to actually hurt Miyuki or Kyoko, it was kind of just to have a false hostage. So there's like that human aspect. We see multiple parts of the film where they'll encounter someone that just like them gets left behind. So like the Yakuza boss, the lady could have turned around and let her dog run and helped him, but she didn't. We didn't, of course, know he was the Yakuza boss. We could have assumed it was anyone, just as she could have. We had the old man who was dying, and, you know, Jin could have walked away as well, but he, you know, gave him that last wish and was with them. So kind of that just connection of humanity that's inherently, you know, supposed to be practiced and supposed to be respected in many of religions we see kind of don't all the time. But the fact that they get to that basis on Christmas of all days, which we know usually has the highest depression, highest, you know, like if you're lonely, that's like the worst time, but also the highest amount of family. But again, could be so commercial where you ignore it. So they get to the, as you said, Rita, as Martin as well touched on, the true meaning of Christmas, as cheesy as it sounds, being humanity and family. So I guess kind of to speak of that, you know, them being poor, kind of, how do you see that, you know, do you think they handled it well in terms of how they're depicting, you know, the poor, how they get to it, and also their in general treatment in society? Because at least how I saw it, they were constantly also ignored, constantly also, despite the fact that Miyuki could go home, despite the fact Hannah technically had a home. the other drag queens were like, come back, it's fine. And Gin being, you know, kind of a deadbeat dad in a sense, could have gone home and could have been there. The fact that, you know, they're poor and they still get, you know, pity, and at that whole end part where Gin's like, I'm glad that one guy didn't die. So kind of, you know, do you think they actually give a very complex and well thought out version of the poor versus what we usually see? Or do you think there's parts they could have done better on? Kind of thoughts and feelings in general about that.
That's an interesting question, and you know, I also just want to say that I think like you summed up the theme and how it ties into just like the general purpose of religion, I guess. I thought you did that nicely, and I think that's what I really responded to this time in the film. And as far as how these characters are depicted, I um, I was surprised this time around how sort of like complex and three-dimensional they were. Just because throughout the film you have your perception of them, and then, you know, like I said earlier, there's kind of these different big reveals about each of them that kind of deepens their character and sort of makes you see them in a different way. And, you know, as far as like in the past, how films depicted poor people, it was sort of like putting them on a pedestal and saying, look, like trying to evoke sympathy, and you know, look at the circumstances that poor and lower class and working class people are in. You should feel empathy for them and help them, was, I feel like, how that was like the strategy for representing poverty in films in the past. And then later it seemed to shift the complete other way, where it's like, no, we're going to show how poverty puts people in desperate circumstances and actually makes them act in ways that aren't noble, or and doesn't romanticize poverty like maybe older films had. And I think that Tokyo Godfathers maybe strikes a balance kind of in the middle. You know, as we're saying, like, it definitely is a really, like, it is a Christmas film, and in the fact that it talks about Christmas, and it does kind of give you the warm and fuzzies at different points, but it also really engages with like the dark parts of human nature and society. And so I think that speaks to how then that these characters are depicted. It's not like they're these really great people that we feel sorry for, and it's not their fault that they're in the circumstances they're in, but they're also not these like desperate criminals that or make us to feel like we should eliminate poverty to eliminate crime, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I think Reed said it kind of perfectly there. That's pretty much exactly how I feel. You know, I think what I enjoyed about this film is how layered it is in its depiction of these characters and of these sort of perspectives. And you know, I mean, I think that even goes beyond just the three main characters that we follow. Various other characters that we meet seem to be in their own sort of experiencing their own hardships, and make certain decisions that we can kind of question and think about. But what I ultimately felt is that I appreciated how, as Reed said, we see these sincere, positive moments, as well as other moments that we kind of question these three characters a bit and some of the decisions that they make. So I feel like at certain points, Hana to me felt like maybe a bit selfish and a bit almost like what I felt the character at the end. I don't remember the lady's name who we ended up learning actually took the baby, and when we were sort of tricked, we thought she was the actual mother. I almost felt similarly about them in certain ways, but I like how we kind of see like, okay, this character Hana maybe perceived a certain way just by how they look, but you know, we kind of see, you know, characters in different positions of maybe social status, in similar ways, and that question I think is just made a little more complex, and I think that's something that this film does very very well. I think it asks questions and gets us thinking rather than, as Reed said, kind of just like sort of sensationalizing things and just making like a sort of good feel type of approach to this kind of story, which I mean I was surprised the kind of turns that it takes. I really didn't expect that. I wasn't sure what I expected with this concept of a story, but I really didn't expect the various twists and turns that it takes. Yeah, I'm not sure I have much more to say than that. I think Reed kind of put it perfectly, but I have to say that I did really enjoy how complex this film gets and how much it really got me thinking.
Yeah, when I think about scenes where you're like, oh, these people, like, you want to go naturally, like Reed said, I pity the poor. And they do it with balance for everyone. It is complex that no one's really, again, not like good or evil. People are kind of neutral and can learn. So that whole, when I think about the fact that like you said, Marty, where like Hannah's selfish and like go to the cops, that has a different context now. And especially thinking of America, we're like, no, we don't really want to go to them often, but we understand for them, it's like, well, they probably will send out something, about the baby, like, hey, where's the parents? And we clearly saw throughout the entire piece that there was news tracking it, like these wild things are happening. Someone did care. I think about the part where they're at the graves, that's someone's relative and they're stealing. And traditionally for some culture, they leave food, and you're going, are you disrespecting that? And for people who believe in, or in particular how who believe in God, it's like, well, you're kind of disrespecting someone else's belief in which someone else is, taking that to the afterlife. And kind of again, like thinking also of Miyuki, it's like, well, you ran away. Yes, you stabbed your dad, but you kind of ran away and you act really belligerent to these two people who are helping take care of you. And yeah, Gin's not the best. He's also the prime example of someone who's, again, we see his lies throughout the story that Hannah gets really mad at it. She goes off on him, but in order to get him back with his family. But in general, it was like, wow, you kind of ruined your family in a sense, and your poor wife looked for you. And for Miyuki, it's like you could have gone back the entire time and kind of maybe try to work out something with your dad. And so they are very complex. And for everyone else, I just think about that whole portion in the hospital again. It's like, oh, I'm glad that the guy who's kind of scummy that was marrying the Yakuza guy's daughter, the one who helped get him to get debt, he's like, oh, I'm glad he's not dead, despite the fact earlier he wanted to murder this guy and wanted to beat him up. But kind of like almost everyone deserves a chance, or we're not seeing the complexity of them. Because then I think about the other side where, of course, you see the young hooligans going out of their way, and like we said, where it doesn't absolve, people trying to be like, oh, let's get rid of the poor. Like this clearly shows, let's not do that. That's really messed up. Where they go out of their way to be like, yeah, we're gonna beat them up, and the only thing and they're clearly more well off. And clearly the thing that stops them is just like, oh, my girl said she's at the bar, let's go. And you're like, you're scummy all around. And I don't know if we could see redemption in you, but you're like, you're pretty terrible.
I like that we get like various shades of that too. I feel like, because that's one point that I was forgetting, but I wanted to bring up, was that scene. But then there's other like sort of versions of that, right? Like when they're on the train, I think, and it's like people are like covering their noses, right? Because like they smell. Or even at the end when the parents of the baby want to make the baby's godfather, but the doctor or the nurse that's with them is saying, no, I don't think you want to, like I think they're homeless or something, and they're like, we don't care, why does that matter? So it's like you see like how society might look at these people and treat them in a negative way in sort of various like tiers. And I think that kind of speaks to how this film doesn't just take some sort of broad stroke look at this, but really gets into I think like the details of it, which which yeah, again, I really appreciated.
One of the lines I kind of jotted down that I really liked was the mother, the drag mother that they go and visit, and after she learns what's happened with Hana and her um, uh, former lover, she like says something like "life spares no one" or something like that, and I think that kind of speaks to what we've been talking about. It's just everyone has had bad stuff happen to them in this film, and how they've responded to that stuff. You see both the positive way they respond to it and the negative ways, I guess.
Yeah, like yeah, all those scenes where you're like, oh yeah, there's like, you know, a good or bad to this, and like the drag mother said, you know, essentially everyone has these moments, everyone goes through things, kind of like that sense of life isn't, you know, forever. Things will go on. Like even when you know, she had this question like, oh, was it, you know, was it AIDS, you think? And like, oh no, he like my lover just slipped on soap. So the thing, and kind of they do a really good job of things you expect. That's not what happens. Besides like the myth magical kind of ones, and we can speak about like the end of, or if you guys believe, was it really a Christmas miracle or just happenstance for everything? Just the whole, you know, that thinking of, you would be thinking, especially because this was early. Oh, I forgot to mention this film came out in 2003. So the idea of someone being like, oh, was it, you know, AIDS in the gay community? And that wasn't the case. It was just simply he slipped on the most ordinary soap and, you know, died. Or thinking that oh, these people have the baby, are they going to do something like nefarious with it for people? Let's say in the context of the film, that's what probably people are thinking, and that's not what happens at all. Or, you know, for Miyuki running away, was it something really terrible? And it was like, well, she stabbed her dad, and that's not the worst reason we've seen, you know, teens in films run away. And that the dad clearly still like loves her and was looking for her, and we see that on like the train, where of course even to that character was unexpected to just look out and be like, oh gosh. So there's so much you know, it kind of goes into, again, like life is, you know, c'est la vie when life happens. And I kind of want to get into that question of, do you think it was all happenstance, myth magical? And like my perspective is kind of the mixture of both, like things that were kind of probably going to happen, but also Satoshi Kon has this habit of having things that are also kind of out there, or again, myth magical, where you're like, at the end, just grabbing the, like a gust of wind coming up, and you know, magically can grab this baby. But I think everything else might have just been lucky happenstance, or them being maybe a little street smart.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a fun question, because I think it depends on if you're like more of a Jin or if you're more of a Hana, just like in your worldview or personality, I guess. You know, because from the beginning of the film, we see kind of this tension, like you say, Samantha, like between, I guess, like mystical or like, yeah, magical kind of stuff happening versus like a more realist kind of take from Jin. And then I guess Miyuki's kind of like in the middle there somewhere, just depending on what point of the movie it is. But yeah, I don't know. I hadn't thought about which one. If I think the thing I noticed the most was just that there's like so much great little irony in the movie, where like, you know, Jin kind of lies about being this cyclist at first, and but by the end of the movie he is like a cyclist in some sense, because he's like racing to get to the rest of his group to try and help prevent you know, this grand climactic like tragedy from happening,
and keeping up with a truck, no less. Like he's like yeah. He's a great cyclist.
yeah. So like in a sense, then he he was a cyclist, like, and you know, whether you want to see that as like some sort of magical event that made that happen, or if it just is like a coincidence, you know, that totally just depends on kind of your outlook.
That's such a great point. I think I totally agree with that. I think it's just depends on what kind of person you are and what how you consider things like fate and signs, you know, or if I mean I struggle with that myself sometimes, you know, I whether I see something as like, oh, this was destined or if this is just a coincidence. I feel like I shift in that all the time. So I think that perhaps this is kind of um I don't know. It's asking the viewer to decide how they feel about it. But I mean, I do think it's. Um, I did take note of the fact that so much of the, you know, of what these characters are going through is connected, and how sort of odd that is. And I mean, to my understanding, Tokyo is not a very small place, and yet all of this seems to be happening within the same place, where people are bumping into each other. You know, um, so frequently that it's just like it's a bit funny or peculiar, but I mean it's um, I don't know. I mean maybe the fact that this is a Christmas movie kind of puts us in the position to see it as something beyond coincidence, but um, and maybe with that in mind, I lean toward that as if there's a sort of intention to have the viewer feel a certain way, you know, including this as a taking place within um, that that holiday and with characters who perhaps I mean I don't know that we see them celebrating Christmas at any point, do we? I don't recall, but you know they you know I mean at least Hana seems to be Christian, and so you know I think that there might be I think I lean toward that if that's the question, but and then with the scene at the end with the gust of wind, I mean I have to say I definitely didn't see that coming, and I actually like kind of sat up when when that happened, because I was kind of taken away by the whole sequence of events there. I think that that might speak to just my love and fascination for, you know, animation design, and you know how those scenes were cut and the sound of the wind and how the colors sort of change with the sunset happening. I thought that was a really beautiful sequence there.
And you know, while we're on that sequence too, and kind of on this topic, like if if some of the stuff in this movie were to have happened in like a live action movie with human performers, or if they approached the story in a different way, this would totally feel like such a soapy, over the top kind of melodrama, I guess. And there are aspects of that, but it's all in service of what we've been talking about, you know, the tension between like being cynical and being hopeful. So it actually just all works. And the fact that it's animated means that you can have some of these other like expressionistic touches, like Marty talked about. So yeah, it's just it's such a unique movie in the way it is able to pull off all of this stuff.
Yeah, out of like the Christmas horror films that I could think of that would be not close, but if it were to live action, it would be oh my gosh, what's that Bruce Willis film that everyone's like, it's not a Christmas film?
Die Hard.
Yeah, thank you, Die Hard. Where it's like it'd be imagine because some of those scenes were kind of Die Hardy, especially when there's the crashes at the end. There's the you know there's the shooting where it's like weirdly action movie esque. You know, there's the kidnapping, and then you have the parts where it's kind of a campy, you know, film in terms of like, oh, it's your found family, like that scene where Miki just has that moment with the you know, Hispanic family and just goes, oh, like starts crying is like that's my found family. You know, that's the melodramatic part, and then you just have all those crazy action sequences. So to imagine if it's live action, like a bunch of anime films are and anime TV shows are slowly being turned into, weirdly enough. The Yu Yu Hakusho one's gonna be next, but um, it wouldn't work out because think about the expressions they have to do. I don't think, as much as people can cry and do humanistic expressions, I don't think you can almost be that over dramatic without it being considered, again, so campy we can't take it seriously, like when Hana's crying and everyone else like, oh gosh, but we'll still do what you're doing. It might come off maybe more like teeny sort of thing, and then on the other end, just those, again, for the crazy action sequences, the one where Gin's biking right next to that car, and he's just giving these faces like, oh my gosh, I survived. It might look, again, very silly versus, oh, that probably is a little like shocking as well. So I don't think human expression could do as well. And then of course human bodies can't move the same way. So if they do like the jumps, so they do everything, that expression of emotion through body doesn't look as well either. So the fact that if it was turned into a live action, it probably can't translate and do those messages. It probably undermines a lot of the message that Tokyo Godfathers has going, throughout that whole entire film. I'm trying to think of any sequence that could work, and I don't think many could.
I love that you bring up Die Hard though, because I was also trying to think of similar kind of Christmas movies, and the one I kind of thought of was like I think you're totally right. Like it's totally kind of like Die Hard-esque in the last bit, and then the first bit reminds me a lot of Tangerine, just in the fact that it's like set in like a large metropolitan area, and there's these like impoverished, like transient people taking journeys to get something done on Christmas. And it also just has some of those kind of layered characters like Tokyo Godfathers was. So it totally is like part Tangerine and part Die Hard, and I'm sure maybe even like Christmas Carol in there and other stuff. So it's kind of fun to think about where it lies within the canon of Christmas movies.
Something else I just wanted to point out, I don't know if we have to include this in the podcast or not, it's just like a side kind of thing that I was kind of taken aback by, was the scene when we're in the Latin family's apartment and the lady is breastfeeding both babies. I feel like that's something that we don't see in American films here. We don't see just like, especially not used for like comedy either. I mean, I really like just watching someone blatantly breastfeed without anything like covered up or censored. Like it's just there in front of us. I really appreciated the fact that it was just sort of normalized, but we literally cut to like a close-up of the baby breastfeeding, and then it's just going on throughout the scene. She's breastfeeding both babies. I feel like definitely not if it was, made into live action and like released in for American audiences. I don't think that scene would play out the same at all. But a bit of a tangent, but anyways.
Yeah, I think it kind of speaks on, again, like the humanity part. Like someone was willing to go take a baby that wasn't her own on top of her own baby. And despite the language barrier, like she's still trying, and she's not frustrated by the fact that, Miyuki's the one who's more frustrated, but of course in her head, she's been kidnapped. So that makes sense. But they're not really having like a frustrated conversation of, trying to connect. And there she is, just breastfeeding two babies, no problem. And it also kind of again can also connects to like baby Jesus and the fact that's like, here we go. Here's like the whole biblical part. But what if, maybe, not to say there's like two Jesuses, but maybe there's kind of like more than one connector of humanity there. And that's kind of essentially without saying anything, just that action of just that baby needed to be fed. I decided to go take it. You can judge me. Again, like you could judge me at my restaurant or whatever. That I essentially just took this baby and decided to go feed it. But it needed help. It kind of like there was no second thought. It was just like, let's go help it. So again, it's just that theme of humanity, and maybe also like not doubting who can help you, because especially if we take it into an American context, there's going to be people who are not going to look at minorities to go help in that manner, in a kind manner. Some of it's oh, we hired you to be the maid to do this. Like she wasn't hired, she's just living and existing, and they're both respecting each other in that space. And then taking it from that perspective, two people that completely legitimately don't understand each other, and one of them is like, I was just kind of kidnapped, just to be like, oh, that's okay, sweetie, let's I'm here to help, and then later them connecting over dads. So I think that's kind of again, it's also a sweet, almost Christmas message of here we go. There's humanity, there's the baby Jesus sort of imagery, but almost like that. What if baby Jesus wasn't, this white kid, in some of it, but that connection to everything.
Yeah, totally. And it also just speaks to, I think, like the theme of motherhood that comes up a few times too. Like Hana has this like really strong desire to be a mother, and talks about the fact that she never knew her mother. And then, of course, we have the character Marty brought up, and I also can't think of her name. The fake mother, I guess we'll call her for now. It looks like Samantha's looking up the character name, but
Sachiko.
Sachiko? Okay, perfect. So we see that with Sachiko too, in the fact that we find out she has lost a child during pregnancy, and that's what has motivated her to try and take this baby that's not hers. So there's like just a general, I think, longing for motherhood, and then mourning like a lack of motherhood, or the ability to be a mother, which is interesting. Just considering the baby Jesus stuff that Samantha brought up, and which kind of also makes us think of the Virgin Mary again and stuff. So it is really interesting again how all that stuff is tied together. I was curious to ask you both, on a related note, while we're talking about that scene with the breastfeeding, and we mentioned like the assassination scene. I'm just curious to. I looked down for just like a couple seconds to write a note, and then all of that happened, and I was like, did I miss something? Like, why did this dude why was he shot? Like, who is the person that shot him, and why? Like, I'm not gonna lie, I think my only kind of like minor criticism of Tokyo Godfathers would just be that all the sort of like unexpected and like plot, like all the little kind of side plot threads like do get a little convoluted, which is kind of just like a general problem I have with a lot of anime stuff. But that's a different story. But yeah, I was just a little confused on the plot, some of the plot details, which ultimately was fine, just because the other stuff that I liked resonated with me way stronger than understanding every part of the plot. But I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on that, and if either of you caught that whole thing that I apparently missed in like 2 seconds.
Yeah, I think I want to say sometimes maybe that theme of like everything's happening and things are just kind of random sometimes speaks to life, where things can always be going on around you and you're like, what? So for them, it's like going on around them, and that's not something they tried to do. It just happened. Versus the thing they tried to do, which was like all they wanted was to know where this, woman's baby is, and then they're going on this adventure, and stuff is just again happening around them. That's not what they're trying for. But I can see that being an issue with it reminds me of Doctor Who for some reason, where like there was sometimes episodes where things are happening in the background, you think it would do something, and it doesn't. I think there's a line from there that's like, why doesn't anyone notice there's like this blue, telephone booth that's sitting there? It's like, because people don't see things like when they're basically not trying to. So I think there's a lot of that sometimes in his films, or very specifically in Tokyo Godfathers, kind of relating back to that theme of like them being ignored. And now there's things they're kind of like, again, happening around them. Technically, some of it was ignored in their own way, but some of it was like, hey, I didn't ask for this. But what happened was, or my assumption, like reading some of the details, was I think it's, an assassin. I think that guy, based on context clues, was always scummy because he, got get out of the money. That Yakuza guy doesn't like him, and that's really telling. He's like, he's not good for, my daughter, because he's a little, again, like he's scummy. So I think maybe, screwed over someone else. And a thing I can think of that kind of came out around the same time as the anime like Black Lagoon, where that happens, where they're kind of like, they're all killers, and if you, screwed over the wrong gang, they're gonna go attack each other. So I think maybe he did something, maybe somewhere, in like Latin America or maybe a neutral zone, and they sent an assassin to go get him. Is, you know, and then that shooting happens. The shooting happens the moment Gin wanted to go kill him as well, and that's the only thing it saves. But yeah, it is very random for some of the stuff that happens. Also, when he also dives in front of the Yakuza dad, so I think almost it's like, oh, you're not as scummy, but you are a scumbag sort of idea. So I think that's what happened. It could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was like you just see Gin trying to go at him, at the scummy dude. You see the assassin, and then the assassin shoots, them, and Gin hits the floor, and you could say they almost like, was he trying to save him? And no, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you asked this because I think this is something that I also kind of missed, to be honest. I was a bit confused. There's actually, I agree with you. I think there's some things that I don't quite understand in some capacity because, there's just so much that happens that I think some points were just left to kind of not really explain in too much detail, and so we're kind of I don't know how to put it, but I guess it's just like it's not as important. Maybe I don't know if that's the point, but there's a couple things like, and maybe this is just me, but like so the old man who dies with the bag with what was in his bag, did that make sense to you guys when we see what was in the bag at the end? Because I kind of didn't get that moment. Like there's like he had like money in the bag, I think, that's revealed at the end what was in it, and he's like, if they knew me they wouldn't be happy or something. I that was another thing that I may have missed. I don't know if you guys.
I missed that part too. I forgot there was money in his bag. Oh, yeah, I've been mistaken. I said the hitman was going for the scummy guy, kind of going back to again like my Black Lagoon sort of thing. He was going for the Yakuza boss, and for some reason my brain just like mixed them up for no reason. But he was going for the Yakuza boss dad, and that's when the scummy guy's like, "No, I'll take the bullet. I don't know, prove myself." But so in general, the Yakuza boss, who we know is like being nice, but of course Yakuza, so probably gang, again like gang related. But when I think about going to the bag one, I forgot that happened. Because there were so many bags. Someone's bag, and I couldn't remember if it was the bag of him or the what was it, the what's the name again, Sachiko's husband, where they got the lottery ticket from. I think it was Sachiko's husband that they did, but like I blinked out because there's so many, like, here's a random part where there's a bag, here's a random part where there's like two characters they're talking to that's giving them information, and there's a bunch of cats around, and they so there's a bunch of, again, random happenstance. But I think again it's like it doesn't matter. That's what they're focused on, and what the other people are trying to tell you is like blah blah blah, and they're like, cool, I'm just here for the baby. I'm just doing this. But yeah, for that bag part, I wonder if he was maybe thinking that the Yakuza wasn't too far. Maybe he was like a drug mule. I don't know. Maybe he stole it. There's kind of so many characters we don't know the story for, like the hitman. What's his gig? Are you just a hitman, but you have like a wife that's here and a kid? Who knows? Maybe that's kind of like the happenstance of life. But now you have me really wondering about the bag.
Yeah, but I like your point there, happenstance of life. I think that's actually that works pretty nicely with this film. So I'm gonna go with that.
I am wondering too if there's like other stuff that might. I wonder if there's other stuff that's maybe supposed to parallel with the nativity story that we see at the beginning, and if maybe some of the characters they meet or some of the things that happen also reflect that story. And it's been a while since I've read the like biblical nativity story, so I'd be curious to see if on another rewatch if some of those things kind of line up with that, to speak to some of the other stuff we've been talking about.
That just blew my mind a little bit, Reed. I'm going to be honest, that just blew my mind a little bit. So I'm going to have to, if I watch this again, I'm totally going to watch it with that perspective now, because you may be onto something there. I'll say that for now. You may be onto something.
Yeah, the moment you said that, that's when I was like, wait, there's three people. Wasn't there like so like I was made to go to like a Catholic church, but I didn't pay attention. I played Yu-Gi-Oh in the back with myself.
Same.
So yeah, so I was like, I didn't touch the book. They said things, and I was like, yeah. So in my head, I was like, isn't there three people that visited? Like I typed, I was like, there are three people that visited Jesus, and where it's like with gifts. I'm like, I wonder if was it like the Three Kings or something? I remember that other animated film with the little drummer boy, but maybe kind of there's that again, like the mothers, and then also the sense of fathers, where it's like, well, if the father's absent, they suck. So there's like this paternal thing, and I guess someone's criticism of the film was that they show the kind of back to families. Depicting families is more of a dark fashion and showcasing the problems with traditional families. It's from a quote, I guess, from Susan Napier, and attempts by people to construct a pseudo family out of increasingly fragmented and isolated modern Japanese society. However, like at the end, they all go back to having a normal family, where we assume so. Like we assume Miyuki goes back to her dad, or at least connects back. Gin obviously connects with the daughter, but we don't know how healthy that is. Hana has a place at home back with the drag mother, and that seems actually pretty healthy, but somehow they just didn't check back. But I don't know whether I fully agree with that. That's also like fully negative, or if it's really fully a reset, just because at the end we see, of course, I can't assume anything because we can barely assume the other parts of the film where wild stuff happens. So I'm kind of wondering for that sense of family. It is it is isolating. Obviously, the more modernized we get, but if maybe their stronger family is still the pseudo family, and it's not, that's actually not as fragmented as we think, and maybe if there's still problems with what we see at the end, because we can't predict it.
Yeah, no, I think you said it. I mean, it is, at the very end, Miyuki's father shows up. He's one of the policemen that helps the couple recover their baby, and ends up running into Miyuki at the hospital. And but that's right when the film ends, so it's ambiguous as to what happens after that. So who knows? I mean, maybe some people did reconcile out of the group with their families and go back, but yeah, I think it is sort of left to be ambiguous on purpose. So I think it's hard to make kind of like an absolute statement about whether they go back or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, you just reminded me that that's Miyake's father. So he's the one who's kind of a bit judgmental of homeless people in that moment, which is maybe there's something further to think about there. But and then perhaps how the next moments play out. I wonder if his sort of stance there becomes judgmental, or if that just kind of goes out the window. Perhaps that's a point where us as the audience are supposed to kind of think of how we would treat that situation. I don't know, but I mean, I think that there might be a point to that, in that it's kind of asking us in general to think about how to behave within the society, and to think about our own actions and our own treatment toward others, and again in the larger theme of humanity, where we fall in with that. But yeah, it's hard to, yeah, I agree, it's hard with Reed, it's hard to say kind of a declarative on that point. I don't know if I agree with the critique per se, but it's nonetheless, it is so ambiguous, and it is so complex that I think, yeah, it's kind of hard to make that for me. But I don't know if I would go as far as to make that complaint. I'll say that.
Yeah, they describe as I kind of skip some parts, but like the film offers a more radical version of family. I think is pretty accurate. Where it's, I mean, actually no, I think probably for conservative thoughts that's radical, especially if you're thinking like, oh, that's a drag or trans, depending on your reading. Again, they declared drag, but my reading of them consistently using Hana saying she throughout the whole thing, I feel like feels more, trans, but but anyways, like, oh, that is radical in terms of conservative societies where it's like gay people are accepted. And even there's some struggles about how gay representation is. Um, a little, not a little girl, but like a young teenager. And I feel like it's kind of subtle, but if you see in those flashback sequences, also Miyuki used to have like a larger body set, if you recall. And then, is much thinner. I think obviously they've said, I think it's been 5 or 7 months since she's been homeless. So the idea that she lost weight maybe due to, starvation. But, like, so someone who stabbed her dad gets a family as well. Someone who's, quite a deadbeat dad. And in that beginning with Miyuki, still like even a brat deserves a present. Him still thinking about being a dad. So kind of like that family type does seem radical because you have a drunkard, you have, someone who's gay, you have someone who's probably in society's eyes like, oh, she stabbed someone, she's evil, or vagrant. All right. And again, all three are vagrants as well. But when you think about it, it's, people who are, people who are like friends, no matter how little contentious it is. And people who do genuinely care about each other to the point where, they are taking each other to the hospital and everything else and willing to go through this journey. So I actually don't think it's that radical, especially thinking now where a lot of people have found families, or like we kind of have one in a sense through a Discord or through a cohort. People have some at work, people have some with their best friends they've known for years. So I don't think it's actually that radical, but I can see in terms of like super conservatism, and then all of them, that's, yeah, it's a found, it is a found family that is radical.
And this came out in 2003, right? So yeah, I think it's also interesting to think about that. Yeah, you mentioned found family, which I don't remember that being like part of the lexicon until the past few years. As and from what I understand, it seems like that comes a lot from queer culture becoming more mainstream and visible, because it seems like found families are a really important concept for LGBTQ plus folks. So yeah, it definitely doesn't feel super radical now, like you're saying, Samantha, because I think whether you're part of that community or you're straight, everybody now has kind of a concept of what found family means, and might even have their own version of that depending on their relationship with their immediate family or guardians.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't know if I have much more to say than that. I think you guys have put it pretty well and exactly how I feel. But I to speak of the found family element of the film, I think it treats it really well, because I think I just appreciate how welcoming certain characters are in this film, and I think that kind of gets to some of the fears and experiences that people experiencing some of these things get to, and this sense of sort of home and safety, perhaps. I think would resonate with people who have been in that sort of perspective, and so I think I took note of just the fact that I think it handled that well in terms of how certain characters are there for each other. Yeah.
Yeah, like they all had their anxieties. They all, forget it was not seeing that family again and thinking like he was the failure. But Miyuki, I think it was, will dad love me after I stabbed him? And, when she tries to call him and just doesn't, end up doing it at the end and just, breaks down crying. And she's, again, to consider that she is a teen, so she is the youngest of the cast, if we don't have the baby. If we don't count baby Jesus over here, but she's that's the throes of being a teen, going through all that, and then everything's really big. then you have Hana, who was abandoned. When she looks at the baby, says, that reminds me of me. I had to go through the foster care system. And the other two then just are completely more sympathetic. They already were, but they just get a little bit more sympathetic at that moment of, this is why, Hannah's being selfish with this baby. So kind of the idea where, yeah, the found family, not say like, it kind of comes from not feeling any of those because your family left you or you don't feel like you're in there anymore. But that, you can find someone without it having to be familial blood. It doesn't have to be someone that's, you're super tied to anyways, but that family is you're able to find and you can be accepted again. Is kind of always, it's a good idea to put out there rather than tying someone down to be like, you need to be with your family forever, because there's people you'll have that maybe you were great contention with or have hurt you, but that you're still able to have a sense of love, even if you don't use the word family, but like love and acceptance somewhere else. And I kind of say for like a kind of a last question that isn't such maybe as down, but there's a lot of again commercialization in the film. We see the billboards, we see the the angel. That there's kind of a moment where I actually thought that wasn't real. To kind of going back to the myth magical things of like, Satoshi Kon does this in his film, so is this angel real or is he is he getting hallucinating? So kind of what are your thoughts about that film of like things are commercialized, the invasion of maybe modernity into these spaces and maybe was leaving out, and yeah, kind of that, and maybe some of the like kind of funny intricacies of how they show it in the film as well.
I was just looking to see it because as you're speaking, I thought I might have jotted down a couple of notes kind of along those lines. And one thing I'm kind of seeing is, you mentioned the nativity, and we've kind of talked about that a little bit. And there's also like a pretty, there's like, I guess maybe you call like an establishing shot, if I remember right, of what's basically looks like a McDonald's. Like you don't see the words McDonald's, but you see this huge picture of a Big Mac and like a logo that sort of vaguely reads as the Golden Arches. So, again, that kind of points to the Western influence. Yeah, I think that's the only thing that comes to mind, at least that I wrote down. I guess on kind of one thing I saw that I wrote down too, and that we haven't talked about yet is, I guess, maybe on the opposite end of sort of the commercial pole, and we see like Hana recite these haikus throughout the movie, which I think is kind of a nice touch in how it sort of breaks up the different acts or episodes of the movie, and also then reminds us that we are in Japan and that there are aspects of Eastern culture that we're seeing as well, such as like the haikus that she's coming up with, even though like sometimes those haikus are about Christmas. I wish I would have actually written down some of them, because some of them are really funny, and I wonder if they also sort of encapsulate some of the themes we've been talking about. But I think that's a nice way to balance out sort of the westernized kind of commercial parts with kind of these more Eastern influences as well.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that, Reed, because what my mind went to was just that Christmas is something that obviously is very commercialized here in the States, right? And so like the whole how Coca-Cola has taken advantage of it, and how essentially much of the holiday revolves around gift giving, right? So it was interesting to, I think, as well for that reason, watch a film that's set in Japan and is set during Christmas, and how it would show us a bit of their culture mixed in with that, because I don't know that I took as many notes down of how of this to get to your question, Sam, but I think I do think there was a lot of interesting sequences, as we kind of said a bit, with like how animation was used. Like the haikus, I think were really great, and I had the same thought that I wanted to jot some of them down, and I didn't. I knew I was going to have that feeling when we were recording, but for some reason I didn't stop and write them down. But yeah, I think maybe it gets to kind of like back to the other question too of like, you know, how we kind of think about like whether something is fantastical and magical, or whether it's just coincidence, or, you know, things like that. Because like one line that I wrote down was, you know, like, this is a Christmas present from God, and like, right, and like, and I'm doing God's will. I think it's Hannah that says that. And so there's perhaps maybe I'm still working through this, but I think there's something to how Christianity and Christmas are used within the Eastern setting that that I think was used really, really delicately to get to these deeper themes that play out. But you know, so I think I'm fascinated by it, and I think it was done really well. But I'm still kind of working through it, I'll say. But to get to the thing though, just one like kind of side point that I wanted to make about sort of representation of Japan and Tokyo. I really enjoyed like the opening credit sequence, just because I loved how like they weren't translated, but like the signs that we see seem to be, or I think they were, like we see the filmmakers' names subtitled, but then we're seeing signs like sort of play out across the scene in different ways. And so I thought that was really done really well. But that's a tangent. But anyways, yeah, I'm still kind of working through this question, I'll say.
I mean, it does kind of go into like that whole animation aspect, though. It's like, oh, here's all these, you know, signs coming in. Here's all this. Here's again like modernity coming in, ignoring some people, uplifting others. But kind of that the animation is so good at showing that without telling you. And that's kind of again like I think all of us, and you've seen it through some of our other Cineposium animated podcasts in a sense, where animation can tell a story without needing to literally say anything. And that's the beauty of, I think, animation has over live action. And sometimes like, you know, obviously in live action you can, there's editing and stuff there as well, but like there's just this certain way animation can do it that's so much harder for everyone else. So the fact that, you know, that's, they can juxtapose, give us these lights and give us these kind of, again, wild shots to pretty still shots of this is the environment of, you know, Tokyo. And we see the amount of going to the other kind of, I want to say, other like kind of establishing shots in a way, but establishing the whole, this is how their, you know, tents look. You see all the trash. And that's, again, something maybe harder to depict in a live action where you're looking at it and you're going, that's a lot. You know, they're all making, and to go to sound effects, like they're all making certain crunching sounds, they're all moving around. And you're going, oh, that's the reality they live in. And then juxtapose, they see like that Tokyo being lots of lights. You could see it going in different colors. You see the, like, I was just thinking of that angel scene where you just don't know if that's a real angel, but you know, they're very bright, looks real. That's enough to be questioned, but coming into this very kind of, you know, dirty, gross space to go help someone, but it looks wild in terms of animation because you're looking at it and you're going, I can question more easily if this is real or not just because it's animation, but also the brightness that they have behind it is hard to replicate. The movements is always hard to replicate as well. So I think maybe the true last question is how, you know, well, you know, how good is this animation? Is there still any issues that you have in terms of animation? It's not really story that you have with the piece. And do you think we should have more? Because I don't even think this got just a quick look. This, you know, got really, this has really good reception. I don't think got any you know, definitely, you know, wasn't in the contender for the Oscars. So maybe should we put these more? Should we consider these more in bigger award shows, and should we, look at animation more for a lot? So I know it's a very loaded question.
I mean, I can pretty confidently say yes, though, because I think, there's obviously just maybe two studios that are constantly represented in those spaces, right? And so I would argue that this is, I mean, and that's not to necessarily talk down on, films by those studios per se. I mean, I enjoy many of them, but this I feel is very unique, and I mean, in a story sense, but then in an animation one as well. I don't know that we really don't get very many in this sort of design of anime, right? Viewed on that sort of scale, and so I think that is a sad fact, especially when we watch something like this. I think it's a great film, and I think that it really gets you thinking about a lot of things in a way that I think some films maybe struggle with, or just kind of are sort of falling into a bit of an archetype, or are sort of retelling something, whereas this feels very important and topical and unique. And so that's all to say, absolutely, yeah, I think we should be getting more in this sort of animation style, and perhaps continuing to look beyond the United States, because I think this year as well we've seen I haven't seen actually all of them, but I'm aware of certain films that I do want to see that are animated that are getting some acclaim, and so I'm hoping to look beyond the Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks and stuff to see what else is out there, because I think this is a good example of the potential.
Yeah, no, just to some of the points you're both making, like you've said, you can do things with animated films that you can't do in other types. But on kind of the other side of the coin, it seems like because it's mostly dominated by content meant for children, it does seem still that like animation then automatically gets associated with like, oh, this is a kid's movie. Like animated movies are kids' movies, and obviously we know that's not true. And there's plenty of examples that show that that's not true. But because of what's predominantly available and accessible, I think animation and children's programming kind of get conflated, which is maybe why it's also not as seriously taken as far as like award shows, or like even like film festivals like don't typically show a lot of animated films unless they're like really high profile, like Wolf Walkers, I know, is shown at some film festivals. And I think there's also some festivals that are just dedicated to animated films. But yeah, no, all that's to say just that they don't, animation doesn't have like the clout, I guess, the same level of clout and respect that live action films do, which I think is just a shame, because really like Tokyo Godfathers is an animated film, but it's also a drama. You know what I mean? Like it's doing a film a disservice to just call it an animated film when it also falls in the genre category of a drama, or like we've talked about Miyazaki films, like Studio Ghibli films, those are fantasy films. There's comedies, there's all different types of animated films, but they're just oftentimes, I think, conflated with kids films.
Yeah, when you mentioned those adult ones, I immediately was like, oh yeah, isn't there that Sausage Party one? And out of ones that had a release in theaters. And then we're seeing, a lot of people in our generation go back to a lot of animated pieces, either ones from their childhood, like the X-Men animated series, or ones that, we all grew up on that we're always teetering, such as Avatar: The Last Airbender. That show literally taught me what the word genocide was in the first episode, because that's what they open with. They're like, oh, there's a genocide of the airbenders. And when you're, gosh, like 10, 8 or 10, you're going, what does that word mean? I've never encountered that word. So I think that, that's also an in-between piece. So the fact that the thought is, oh yeah, it's always looped up into children's media, especially in terms of movies, but we know in terms of shows, that's not the case. And or so if a kid watched Big Mouth, that's not good. Or Family Guy, or I know The Simpsons is always a weird in between, but I know it's been more adult, especially now. So I don't, that the thought that's like, no kids, please don't watch those. So it's just that I don't know why movie wise we only think that, despite the fact even in the movies there's been some like Fritz the Cat back in the day, because there was adult animated films, at least what was that, like the 80s or 90s, maybe 70s. So I think we can go back to that word. It doesn't have to be a Disney one. It doesn't have to bank on nostalgia. It doesn't have to be a sequel of a Disney one or a DreamWorks. No, Shrek 15. But it could be something else, and it could just be beyond Miyazaki, because I know in the weeb world, as much as people love it, there's some criticism of terms of like, that's the only one you knew, when there was, again, Weathering with You, Your Name, that came out, and those are from the same director. Of course, any Satoshi Kon pick, which again, he's like the second most known, but that's still like a far gap for people. There's a couple other ones, not only from Japan, but the Rabbi's Cat that I'm looking at. I pulled up G-Kids. Sita Sings the Blues. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but that one is also a more adult story, and that's free on YouTube. And beyond, so not only beyond just America and basically DreamWorks and Disney, we can look beyond just Japan, and specifically Hayao Miyazaki, that there's pieces from all over we wouldn't have. Was it like the Wolfwalkers one, or I'm seeing like My Life as Zucchini. We wouldn't have some of these other pieces that do deal with, again, they're all not just for kids. Like this movie got labeled under G for Reed and I watched it dubbed. It's under G-Kids. And it's the least kid piece I want to say that I've seen that is under that label. Next to how depressing Grave of the Fireflies is. So maybe let's gain more respect for animation. Not just the critics, but like the general audience. Let's get that out there to the voters. And, think beyond the realms of like what animation already does, your imagination. And that's where Tokyo Godfathers gives that and realism all at once. I'd like to say Tokyo Godfathers, great Christmas film. I think gets to the point of two different types of Christmas films. The diehards, the one where the guy has to go through his past, and there's like that one that always gets replayed. Why can't I think of its name? I said it earlier. Not that one. The
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, It's a Wonderful Life.
Okay.
It really is like It's a Wonderful Life and Christmas Carol. It's all those classic films, and I know I put Die Hard in there, but it's all those classic films together mixed with just kind of a realistic melodramatic text of humanity. So it's like, people go watch it. It's really, really great.
That's it for our show this week. Thank you for listening and for your support. Please subscribe to the show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Cineposium and on Twitter at Cposium to keep up with our updates and to keep in communication with us. Until next week, take care, everyone.